Thank you very much for nice words. So, dear colleagues, students, clinicians, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, just a quick brief about Oman Cancer Association before I go into the science. And my talk, I'll make an introductory talk about Oman Cancer Association achievements and vision, and the genetics of cancer and its role in screening and diagnosis. I have no disclosures apart being board member in Oman Cancer Association and overseeing the genetic program and colorectal screening program. So this is the lady, Iron Lady, who started the whole process journey to establish Oman Cancer Association, and she is a cancer survivor, 4-time cancer survivor. And the vision is reduction of burden of cancer at local, regional, Arab and global levels. This is the MMU, which goes around the country. Oman is quite a big country, remote, low population. So we have to go out and screen patients for breast rather than for them to come and have the screening, and go into the screening program. And one of the other projects is the palliative care, for which we go outside the borders of the country to teach nurses and doctors how to apply palliative care for people who require such services. And this is the most important program whereby families who have to come to the capital for chemotherapy and they have no place to stay, so they are entertained and placed in this villa where they receive their chemotherapy over a period of time without traveling around, and then once they finish the program they go back to their respective regions. So the most important project that I want to share with you is the genetic center, the letter sequence precision oncology inception concept timelines, which we engaged with Ministry of Health. So in Oman we have the genetic center, for which they have well-qualified people, but they lack the machinery to do such tests. So as Oman Cancer Association introduced the program, and we use their facilities to offer patients free of charge, including expatriates who are living in Oman. A similar test will cost the country almost $7,000, but with our program it's only a token less than $300. So we are applying almost about 300 tests per year for the program, and free of charge, and mainly for solid tumors. So to date we have done almost 256 tests, including gliomas. There are challenges to be addressed, but we just started to find teething problems in any program we are going through. This is a sequence of NGS at the National Genetic Center. Right, no. Yeah. Hello? Can you hear me? No. I think this is better. Right, so these are briefly the tests that have been done so far, because this has been actually supported by a CSR program in Oman, petroleum countries, petroleum companies that finance the program. So we have to provide a report as we go along, and to get financing to be continued. So just getting out of medicine into something very conceptual, this is how I put my thoughts into place. I'm very ardent fan for Formula One, and I use MOH as the Ministry of Health, and an analogy to it is the Federation International Automobile. So that is governance. And to compete in such a sport, you have to utilize your resources in a very strict manner, because it's very competitive. And the HIS system is the data collection, where you can use your data in order to streamline your financials and your resources in the proper way. Stability or sustainability is where the car can really go very fast. So in medical practice, you need stability or sustainability to improve your quality of care amongst patient or any other program. So what do we have at the moment to date as far as genetics and clinical practice? So our friend Professor Yuri, they introduced two formats of methodology to test for genetic testing. And this method is used to identify mutations where the patients, before they go for surgery, they can actually be sectioned according to the genetic testing. And instead of doing total thyroidectomy as we used to do before, we can actually decide to do partial or complete. You can have a lesion which is very small, in millimeters, but if you have a mutation, a decision has to be taken to do total thyroidectomy. Apart from the mutations that you see, very common mutations, the BRAF mutation, the RAS mutation, the TAT mutation, we also have gene fusions. And this has opened an ocean of therapeutics, very expensive, the tyrosine kinase inhibitors, multi-kinase inhibitors, whereby the lesions do not respond to the classical therapy of iodine ablation, and therefore you have to introduce these molecules in order to control the disease. Of course, it is not as simple as it appears, because below that level you have copy of number of alterations, which is about 7%, although the genetic test will tell you which drug to choose, but you may find that the response is very poor. So we are beginning to go in this long journey of understanding genetics and clinical practice and how we serve our patients. So in thyroid, they've made a lot of inroads, how to use it and when to use it. In the States, it's commonly used. In our country, if the FNAC, final aspiration, comes as atypical and it's meeting the criteria of TREDS 4, which is moderate suspicious, then you go ahead and do a genetic testing. There are two available, the Thyrosac and the Afirma. They're equally good, but expensive. Now, breast cancer is the challenging and very common in our country. And the next cancer that is common is thyroid cancer and then colorectal. So there's always an overlap in different countries, the different kinds of cancers. Now, if you look at the left-hand side upper area, you'll find endocrine sensitive and the endocrine resistance. The problem with these tumors, they evolve. Whenever you hit them, they become resistant, and then you have to go to another level of therapy. And it is an expensive process, but this is the practice at the moment. And the pathology or pathophysiology is at the micro level of the cellular changes or dedifferentiation. So far we have had amazing results with the CDK4 and 6 inhibitors plus endocrine therapy. And then just below you can see the different studies. And once you go into endocrine resistance, then you have to use the different methodology, including chemotherapy plus other therapies with biologicals. And this was published quite recently, so it's a good way. And the challenges have remained the same, the evolving tumors in therapy when you have resistance. Just to share with you, this is a tool. When the patient goes for lumpectomy, the surgeon actually, at the time, real time, they can see how deep they can go and remove the tumor. And the results is immediately. So they've done about 9,000 cases in Iran. It's an Iranian technology, and we want to introduce it in our setup. So ORCA actually supports the Ministry of Health. We don't interfere, but we suggest of different interventions. Now, going back to different aspects of tumors, the neuroendocrine tumors, the craniopharyngioma, pituitary metastasis. Mainly these metastases, they come from the bone and the lung. Meningioma, spindle cell oncocytoma, and others. I will concentrate on the craniopharyngioma. Previously, our knowledge was mainly on gelatinous type. There are other types which are named papillary type, and the treatment varies. So this is the papillary craniopharyngioma, and the non-surgical management, of course, again, if you notice, you have BRAF inhibitor mutation, and the therapy almost mirror images what we do in thyroid cancer. And interestingly enough, sometimes you have renal cell carcinoma at the same time with papillary. So you have a patient with renal cell carcinoma, and you have papillary at the thyroid, incidentally picked. Patients with who are on treatment for lymphoma, when they go for their follow-up after treatment, incidentally we pick up papillary lesions of the thyroid. Invariably, they are positive for papillary carcinoma. So one should be very careful in dealing with this group of patients. So the therapy for non-surgical management in papillary craniopharyngioma is, again, I'm sharing with you the different mutations, BRAF, and the different therapy, which is dabrafenib and encofarinib, the NIPS as I call them, most of them biologicals, and they have good outcomes, but they evolve with time. As you hit the tumor, you find there's resistance as you go along. And this is the challenging. This is from the Memorial Sloan Kettering recent finding about using intraoperative immediate diagnosis of histology using AI and collecting the data to use an AI machine. And you have even an app on the telephones. So this is a gonadotroph adenomas, SFI lineage. It's a pituitary neuroendocrine tumor. So actually, while intraoperative, you can take a decision about how much you're going to move and decisions following the operations. This is the molecular functional imaging of pituitary adenomas, and you have the glucose transporters, the D2 receptor binding, and it's a very vast molecular mapping where it can be used effectively in diagnosing and follow-up, especially when you introduce tools like nuclear medicine. And gallium dotatate is used immensely in identifying to see how these neuroendocrine tumors evolve and as they recur. This is Cushing's is the most difficult of diagnostic patterns because it can be a small tumor which is causing all the problems, and the big one is actually indolent, not functioning. So the best methodology to diagnose it and identify or geolocalization is using the 11C methionine PET CT. They can pick up these tumors, and then surgery has to be done immediately because of the cardiovascular impact with the Cushing's and diabetes. So to wrap up, let me share with you a case presentation, because this is diverse clinical utilization of genetics, theranostic use of imaging to identify the tumors. So this is a 17-year-old boy, competitive swimmer, presented with episodes of tachycardia, palpitation, excessive perspiration, headache, dyspnea, easy fatigability, exertional angina, and ventricular arrhythmias. So he ends up first with the cardiologist and undergoes immediate heart MRI, and they found a lesion somewhere in the heart, the right atrioventricular mass, 3 times 2.3 times 2.3 centimeters, and very near to the right coronary artery. So they did an angiogram. It's a vascular mass in direct anatomical proximity to the right coronary artery, which supplies blood to the mass without causing narrowing of the vessel. Chest CT and abdomen was done, and again identified the oval mass in different areas, as depicted here. Biopsy was done and it showed chromogranin A was positive, syntapficin was positive, tyrosine hydrolase was positive, and the SDHB, SDHA were awaited, and you have somatostatin TR2A positive and Ki67 about 13%. So the impression was a paraganglioma, and this is how they behave, very innocently, and then suddenly you are drowned in a sea of ocean. You don't know which way to go. So this is a process I want to share with you, how we go about such cases. So as I mentioned, we use gallium dotatate PT, PET-CT to identify and to take decision. Now SUV is not the the BMW SUV. It's standardized unit values, and the higher it is, it means the lesion is active, and you have to focus in this area. And you can find, as shown here, 2 areas where you have high SUV. So the patient underwent surgery, classical, where you remove the lesion and you think, oh, everything is done, hunky-dory, end of the story. And then you come with surprises as you go and follow up the patients. So MRI was done again after a month or 2 and identified again para-aortic mass, maximum 2 times centimeters, and the adrenals were normal. Another gallium dotatate, because if you depend on one modality of imaging, you might miss the biological active part of the tumor. Again, the SUV, it has reduced from the previous one. The nodular lesion, paravertebral, it's not very much exciting, but what happened, they picked up another nodular lesion at L5, a new lesion. So this has to be followed up, because these lesions can remain silent and suddenly, after a time, they become active again. So the patient underwent another surgery, and the histology showed again chromogranin positive, the genetics still awaited, Ki67 8%, not high, extraadrenal paraganglioma, Ki67 4%, and the gap score was 5. Post-operative evaluation of the hormones which indicate activity of the tumor shows no methanephrines were high, 24-hour urine is high, plasma 3-methoxytyramine was not very high, methanephrine not high, 24 hours not high, and the patient was symptomatically treated. Now, here comes the gist and the most important part of your diagnostic forte, and the STH exon 2 C11-2C was positive, and the father heterozygote was also a carrier. No paragangliomas seen in the father, and this comes the idea of integrative medicine, where the tumor may be there but it's not active. And these are the patients you have to put an eye on and follow them up over years. They could be silent for 2 years or so, and suddenly the tumor becomes active, and if you don't follow them, the tumor just flares up and you lose it. And the diagnosis of this patient with multiple noradrenaline secreting paraganglioma carrier, underlying STH mutation with maternal imprinting, familial paraganglioma syndrome type, pseudohypoxic cluster 1A, and penetrates is from the mother. Lifetime risk 43% by the age of 60. So you see how genetics are playing the role of diagnostic follow-up, but of course in conjunction with theranostic medicine. And this requires a multi-disciplinary team to address from a molecular geneticist, a radiologist in nuclear medicine, and endocrinologist, and even oncologist. So I thank you for listening, and together we are stronger. Thank you.